the motion to strike our seat from the rolls, had reached its third reading by the time they let me through the vault doors. I took the place they pointed me to, the respondent's rail, a narrow stone lip at the bottom of the Orson High Concord, with the whole assembly rising in tiers above me like the inside of a bell. 200 of them, perhaps more, in the gray ceremonial weave the inner ring wore for erasures. Their faces held the long, still patience of people who had already decided. Above the dome the day was bright and cold, and the light came down through the glass and pooled on the floor where I stood, and on nothing else. The Speaker of the Concord read the motion without looking at me. Permanent exile. The Terran line struck from the signatory rolls. The provisional seat held empty these 11 years, a courtesy, they called it dissolved. The clerks would scrape my people's name from the founding weave and close it over, the way you close a wound that has stopped mattering. They had a reason. They always had a reason, and theirs had a name, the Tesseran Drift. 11 years back, a Concord patrol and a human survey convoy had met in the dark over a contested marker, and something had burned, and a Concord cutter had not come home. The record the Concord entered into its own history said the humans had fired first on a vessel flying Parley colors. On that record they had voted us out. On that record they were about to vote us gone. I had been the envoy who stood at this same rail 11 years ago and told them the record was wrong. They had heard me out the way you hear out a man already falling, and then they had exiled me with my people. So they expected little from me now. A delegate of the second tier rose and spoke of closure, of the dignity of finally settling an old wound. Another spoke of mercy. That erasure was kinder than the long humiliation of a seat no one would ever fill. They spoke the way men speak over a grave when they are certain the one in it cannot hear. I let them. I had learned, across 11 years of waiting, the particular weight of saying nothing while others decide your fate, and how much heavier it sits on them than on you. When the speakers were spent, the Speaker of the Concord turned to me at last. By their law the exiled may answer once before erasure. He asked whether I wished to plead for reinstatement. The room leaned in for it. They wanted the pleading, I think. It would have closed the wound cleanly, the human at the bottom of the bell asking and the Concord merciful refusing. It is an old shape, and they knew their lines. I did not plead. Before you strike the line, I said, unseal Concord Archive Index 740, restricted band, entered 11 years ago under the Drift Inquiry. That was all of it. I had carried that string of numbers across 11 years, the way other exiles carry the key to a house that no longer stands. Nothing moved. Then the Speaker asked, with the patience of a man correcting a child, what I imagined was in the Concord's own restricted archive that the Concord did not already know. Your patrol's own log, I said, the cutter's recorder. You sealed it the week after the inquiry opened. You never entered it into the history. You entered the version you preferred. A senior delegate came half out of his seat to say that restricted seals were lawful, that no respondent could demand the opening of the Inner Rings archive. He was right, and I did not argue it. I only said that the law allowed the Concord to keep a thing sealed. It had never claimed the thing would change while it slept. I watched it move through them after that. Not all at once. It never does in a body that large. It went row by row, the way cold goes through standing water. The delegates of the second tier who had spoken of closure went quiet first. Behind the bench the archivists, 3 of them, gray and folded into their alcove like instruments left in a drawer bent to their consoles, and I saw one of them stop and check again and not look up. Index 740 existed. They could all see now that it existed. The only question left in the chamber was why it had been sealed, and that question was already answering itself in 200 minds at once. An aide leaned in and named, lo, the officer who had chaired the Drift Inquiry and pressed the seal. The name carried further than he meant it to. The officer had not retired into the dark with his work. He sat now in the third tier in the gray weave, a presiding voice of the very body about to vote. Heads turned toward him before they could stop themselves. He did not turn his. The speaker should have moved to the vote then. The motion was on the floor. He could have driven it through before the doubt set hard. A colder man would have. But the conquered had spent 11 years believing its own record, and a man cannot vote to erase a people while wondering whether the thing he means to erase them forever happened. He hesitated. The hesitation was the whole war, and I had won it standing still. Down in the lower tiers, a second delegation, the freight lane houses who had needed our convoys back when we still ran them, withdrew their names from the motion one after another, quietly, the way you step back from an edge you had not noticed you were standing on. The speaker watched the count thin. Then he ordered the index unsealed. It took the archivists a long time, or it felt long. Vault law required 2 seals and a witness from the inner ring, and they sent for the witness, and we waited, 200 of them and one of me, under the cold, bright dome. The witness came at last, an old keeper of the deep registry, brought up from a level beneath the chamber that none of them named aloud, and she laid her hand to the second seal without meeting a single eye. No one spoke. The light moved a hand's width across the floor. When it played, it did not play for me. It played for them across the great curve behind the bench, the patrol cutter's own recorder, 11 years dead and speaking. I did not need to watch. I had heard it once before, long ago, from a conquered officer who could not carry it any longer, and who put it in my hands before he went where I could not thank him. I watched their faces instead. That is the only place the truth ever truly lands. Somewhere in the upper tiers, a delegate set down the stylus he had been holding to mark the vote, and he did not take it up again. The cutter had fired first, not the convoy, the cutter. A nervous gun crew over a contested marker, parley colors misread in the dark, an order given too fast, and a vessel that did not come home because of its own people. On the recording, a young gunnery officer could be heard asking twice whether the convoy had returned fire at all. No one had answered him. No one ever had. And then, after, an inquiry that found a cleaner story, and a seal, and 11 years stacked on top of it like floors built over a flooded room. The motion to strike our seat was not called to a vote. You cannot vote to erase a people for a crime your own vault says they never committed. Even the ones who still wanted it could not make their hands do the thing with the recorder still warm. The speaker entered a recess of indeterminate length. By their own procedure, a recess of indeterminate length is how the conquered lets a motion die without admitting it ever lived. No one moved to reinstate us either. That would have meant saying aloud what they had done, and they are not built for that. They are built to seal things and move the light along the floor and call it history. I gathered nothing because I had brought nothing, only the numbers, and I no longer needed them. I climbed up out of the bell the way you climb out of deep water slowly, and at the top I stopped at the vault doors and looked back once. 200 faces, gray in the cold daylight, staring at a record they had kept for 11 years and never once read. They had built a vault to hold the things they did not want to be true. They had only forgotten that a thing does not stop being true because you seal it in the dark. I went home. We still did not have our seat, but never again would they be able to pretend they had taken it for a reason.